Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, a warm welcome to you all for the second conversation of our Chinese Challenges series on the role of architecture in China's great transformation.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a particular privilege to welcome you tonight as a co-host of this evening's panel discussion on behalf of the Asia Society Switzerland.
How do you perceive the role of architecture in contemporary China?
In past decades, probably is the most active fields. City Beijing also at that moment was construct more than whole Germany. So it's almost like a war zone.
The funny thing is we saw in the exhibition large photographs also of architecture, of projects or planning, which finally were deserted and turned into ruins. And there you saw, this kind of copying the style of Neuschwanstein in Bavaria or the Vesuve in Naples. And so what is the need to imitate this kind of style? What does it give to the people or to the planners who do that? Is this a kind of tried marriage with Europe and its monuments, or also with America?
Well, the building in any architecture is you have to answer who you build the building for. And in China, you only would answer that for the authorities and those party members. They don't understand anything about art or architecture. And if you have good relations with them, at the beginning you can get the land. Land, they said belong to people. Actually, it just belong to the party. And once you get the land, you also get the bank loan, which also belongs to the party. So before you start to build, you just have to draw a drawing, which a rendering. Then you can start to sell. Before the building is built, because such a big market, everybody needs a place to live. And basically, communists take all the private properties after 49. So they gradually selling the land and selling the buildings to the people, and made the land very expensive because the demanding is very high. So they don't have to really make a good building. Any building will be desirable. It just all the architects they only hire people who can do good renderings, and the inside is all the same. It's all basically it's very rough and very quite violent in terms of using space or how lifestyle is still not established. There's no really private lifestyle.
And the development of taste, for instance?
No, there's no such thing at all. It's you just first you have to find a place to live, then you have to move your parents together to live together. They all have belonged to very different society, different time, different kind of knowledge or no education. So everything is very primitive, I should say. Until today, even some people already made money, but still they come from that old part of society, and. So if you talk about architecture or art, art is more private. It's more easy to dealing. Yeah. As long as you have a collector like a Uli, then
you can hide a canvas behind your bed or something like that.
Yeah, you're fine. But the architecture is really for the market, but the people normally they only argue how big is the room, how many percentage belong to the public, like 100 square meters, maybe almost 30% belong to the doorway, or they will measure that, and then they will do the whole interior renovation, which is cost almost as much as the architecture. It's
How
so
can you
rough.
afford that?
Well, I don't know how they can afford it. That's still it's a question. You know, they sell the very, very high price.
Yeah.
For a while, the buildings just, you know, had some added weird elements perceived to be Chinese, and thus the building would suit the taste of the mayor. And then, you know, that mayor disappeared, and then that note of taste disappeared too, and then, well, came more of a design concept, wider design. In some cases, most of the time, of course, like Weiwei describes, it's function, efficiency, low cost. But then some extravaganzas appeared in design. Another most recent move is a pendulum swinging back again by the presidency, say, demanding that one would again stop, you know, with this Western type construction, design, architecture, and return again to the Chinese roots.
And Uli talked about this pagoda on the roof. Why it happened is only because all the buildings and projects, large projects, has to have the leader to say yes. So when they go to a room, when they see all the models, they always look from top down. So they always have this view. So all the buildings in China for about 20 years, they would create a crazy models of the roof. You know, some like a water wave, some like an eye, or, you know, a phoenix or a dragon or anything. Okay. Because the leader only looked at the roof, said, "Oh, that's beautiful," you know. So if he says that's beautiful, that means the next 5 years all buildings would working towards that way, because most architecture big firms are only get jobs to please the leader, you know. So
if he says pleasing the eye, he means pleasing the leader.
Yeah, yeah.
Is this a sort of variation
it has
of
to
Prince
be.
Charles in London?
The mayor, Uli, mentioned that he used to have photographs in his pocket, would always show people what kind of building he likes, which is kind of like old temple or pagodas. So all those architects would add that. Otherwise, you don't get that competition. You do not win the competition.
With Weiwei, we have worked on a very, very interesting master plan for Jinhua, the city where his father was living, I think grew up, was born. And that was interesting because it was an attempt to do normal architecture for every day, for living and working, and not the public buildings. And that was an attempt to develop a vocabulary for something that is at the same time archaic and traditional. It was using courtyards, for instance, and at the same time was a very contemporary architect. So we were trying to work on such models. But of course we knew that this could have been really beautiful. I think the studio that you've built, Weiwei, was a bit in this line in Shanghai that then the government took down. Yeah. It could have been interesting. And this is ein vergeblicher Kampf. It's a lost battle also in the rest of the world, because modernism tried to establish a new model for the world, for every day, and for every place. Maybe that was the mistake. Once traditions were falling apart after industrialization. And now, even in Switzerland, especially, of course, right-wing parties, but also everybody has a feeling or wish. We want Swiss architecture, we want French architecture, we want Austrian architecture. That's very popping up right now with the upcoming idea of borders and nations. That's a very interesting parallel.
It's a weird concept.
Yes, but it's of course weird because only the flavor can be local, but it cannot go back to when, you know, for instance, Emmental in the countryside or in Thun, you had local traditions that were really different from Grisons, from Graubünden, from one generation to the next, and it was, all the buildings were beautiful in every part of the world. All the architectures were amazing.
Now look, even at the farmhouses.
Sorry, the farmhouses.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Chinese traditional houses are breathtaking. So this is something that is lost everywhere. But you could, of course, say, now we want to go back to, let's say, traditional models, like, for instance, in China, Chinese cities, the courtyard house. That's something that is also in Arab countries, in the Middle East, is a model that works well. Switzerland, you have to do other things. But what happens is that, for instance, you define a modest scale in the countryside, 2 or 3 stories. You have a roof which is like this and orients itself like this to the lake. And 80% has to be wood. And this is, of course, ridiculous. But I tell you, and that's my business, I prefer landscapes that are built like this with this kind of simplistic way than you let it all go. Yeah. And you can see the difference, for instance, in the coastal areas in Mediterranean Europe. If you compare the Italian coast with the French coast, the French is a national state. They unify the language, the religion since 500 years, and the Italians
centralized too, yes.
And the Italians let it go.
Yeah.
The French said houses have to be just 2 stories, the roof has to be like this, and you have to have these tiles, Mönch und Nonnen, and the render is pink or beige, all ugly. But now, 30 years later, it's almost invisible, and it works pretty well. I think it's an interesting lesson, aesthetic lesson. And in Italy, you have this wild thing, and sometimes you find some nice thing. That's good.
Yeah.
But in France, you don't find even one nice building, almost none. But but everything has a homogeneous sort of
the pattern itself.
Flavor, you know, a flavor.
Yeah.
So we can just have flavor, but not anymore this traditional culture.
Yeah.
I think that's a global problem, you know.
Yeah. But it also depends maybe on the mood of the specific nation. No, I mean the French are somehow really different from the Italians, and you like both countries very much, but it's a different style.
I ask you as a Swiss also, and we are used to these landscapes in the middle land. Let's say everything is really just uniform brei, and most of it is really ugly. And then you have some zones, like I mentioned above the Lake of Thun, where you have these houses. They're also ugly, but strangely they are hidden behind this wood homogeneous quality, and somehow it works.
That's the Potemkin coulis.
You know, if I was in a populist party, they would hire me as their hero architect, because I could say this is how you should build. Yeah, but I mean, I'm saying that somehow it works. You know, it prevents from the worst mistakes.
It's really compared to. At first, I don't have much choice. You know, I grew up in education where almost has no education, and I'm a little bit benefit because my father was a poet, and even your father, your parents, or your relatives was an artist or a poet. Already you become so benefited about it, you know, because the rest of people doesn't really never see a piece of art or even just a book about art.
It's another planet.
Yeah. So in my family, we have all kind of Western publications, you know, poetry and art. So in the early time, I already quite used to that. But even I don't really like art that much, you know, I'm not, it's true,
it's hard work.
So when people telling me I'm overrated, I'm very happy about that kind of conclusion, because I don't really care that much about it.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I could believe you.
Well, it's hard to believe, but it's true, you know, even with my condition, I already have friends like this, so why I have to become a very good artist? You know, I'm still working, and I still have a lot of things to do, and you know, I can always be an activist or a filmmaker, or you know, or I'm even I can be a good cook, you know, so. You know,
I would like to taste that.
I would, I would I'd love to invite you to.
You could even compare, although not mine.
Okay.
Not mine.
Yeah, but Ai Weiwei didn't really answer my question. But you are a relentless worker, enormously, and you have different channels to mold your art, your expressions, your meanings, your political meanings, your aesthetic meanings. And there is, I think, in every artist, also an architect, there is something inside which tells you who you are by expressing yourself with the means of art or architecture. So what is that?
I think we're not easy to take the conclusion from the outside. We have to really, and we also distrust what we have been doing before. We're always questioning those conditions and to see if there's maybe that's a mistake, or maybe that doesn't really, it's not me, or if that's my feeling.
I somehow understand. I have similar emotions. That of course you can just do what you do, and you go for it with a certain furor. But you also don't like it so much because you hate the fetishism that is connected to it. But you are driven by the curiosity and by this experimental and experience and meeting those people that you do that together. That's more interesting than looking back and store it. I'm a bit depressed when I see museums and collections and archives and all these things. On the other hand, we've done an exhibition on our work and we called it Waste, and many people believe that this was a kind of coquetry, you know? Mm-hmm. But it's in fact what you leave behind. That is the result of a process, a creative process, even if art is more highly judged and has a price tag, you know, than architecture. I think that can be compared. I don't know whether a poem is different because it's less material. Maybe is a different, I would be interested to know from a poet what his take is on that question.
I have a question for Ai Weiwei. You are living in Berlin now. Do you think you still have influence in China, and you think you are leaving slowly from the center of the attention?
In English, you also have a sentence called out of sight, out of mind. I think certainly my not being in China made the authority feels more comfortable, and also give me a sense of safety, which is, I think it's very important, not only for me, also for my family, for the people who care about me, but. I'm not a nationalist. I think even I can sense every bit of love your land or nation, which can really, it can be a strongest feeling of human being. My father is a very patriotic poet. But still I'm living in this contemporary world, which is full of contradiction and all kind of challenge we have, and I'm part of it, and I still feel I'm a Chinese. I still have a Chinese passport. If I can contribute to China, I will be always love to do it. You know, it's not a passion. It's just I'm a Chinese.
Mr. Herzog, you mentioned Whitney, you know. And you have queues every morning in front of the gate of the museums that want to go there. So do you have any do you hope at least that, you will start a movement in China too?
I think that's a good question. First of all, optimism. I think as an architect you are an optimist, because architecture is really the ultimate physical expression of something that you do because the next generation and you have to work. And so that's so one given is okay. And then when we did the stadium with Weiwei, Pierre and myself and our team, Of course, we wanted to do an Olympic stadium. Of course, we wanted to do this design because we were really understanding that this is going to be an extraordinary building. And of course, we were a bit naive because we have been asked, of course, why do you do this? Is this propaganda? And of course, Weiwei was very outspoken, especially later also. But we all somehow hoped that being there, making a serious building was a contribution for another generation, for young artists and architects. And yes, we believe that we did the stadium, conceived the stadium as a public building. And public buildings where people can meet are always dangerous, are political buildings.
Of course.
You know, and that was certainly at the back of our mind. So it has not maybe a belief, but a hope that you make a contribution. And I think buildings can maybe be ugly, but especially they can be stupid in that you don't use it as a potential for creating public space, whether it's in China or even in Switzerland. Absolutely. In Switzerland, it's needed because people hate their neighbors, they are unfriendly. And in China, you need it because you need to bring people together in the public sphere. So architecture is very political.